Today's Along the Road video comes out of Genesis 41. This one's got me thinking, because a little bit of background. Starting in chapter 37 of Genesis, you've got the story of Joseph and his dreams, and then his brothers don't like his dreams, so they sell him into slavery. He goes down to Egypt, where he ends up being a servant to Potiphar, who is one of Pharaoh's officials. He has favor with God and gets promoted and is put in charge of his house. Potiphar's wife tries to seduce Joseph. He does not give in, but she accuses him of rape. He ends up in jail. Well, a little bit later, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker for Pharaoh get thrown into prison. They have two dreams. Joseph lets them know, okay, Mr. Baker, you're about to have a bad week. And he dies. The next one says, oh, you're about to have a good week. And he gets out of jail and gets promoted. Well, he asks these guys to remember him and get him out of jail because he's falsely accused. Well, not only does he not get remembered by the chief cupbearer, but verse 1 of chapter 41 has this kind of almost in passing type of phrase that just stopped me dead in my tracks. And it says, after 2 years had passed, and I just go, wait a minute, 2 years? He's in jail for 2 full years before anything else happens. And I just think in terms of our, hey, this must be happening immediately. How would you even start to process being left in there unjustly for 2 years? Well, then verse 16. So what ends up happening is Pharaoh has a dream. The chief cupbearer goes, oh my goodness, I remember now, a couple years ago, the baker and I were in jail and there's this guy. So he tells him, call on Joseph. Well, Joseph comes up and we see in verse 16, Pharaoh has just asked Joseph, hey, can you interpret this? And he says, no, I can't, but God will give you the answer you desire. And that whole section there, and then it goes on and a whole lot of other things happen in Joseph's life, but specifically in 41, those couple verses have me asking some questions. One is, do I wait for God's timing, or do I put my own parameters on it? You know, I don't know about you, but sometimes I think we fall into this trap of if something doesn't happen immediately, then it must not be God's will. And so we automatically take another path. Or if God doesn't get me out of this circumstance immediately, then God must not love me, or God must love other people more. Or there are all these lies that can come into our head when we start evaluating God's timing by our priorities. And so just thinking of the timing question, do I trust God's timing? And that verse 16, there's no place in chapter 41 where Joseph comes out and says, what were you doing? Why weren't you remembering me? Man, I asked you 2 years ago. The first thing that we find Joseph saying is that God is trustworthy, that God can provide, that God will give the answer, that he can't even do it, that he's not even trusting himself, but he's trusting God's wisdom and God's sovereignty. And so he immediately goes into promoting and glorifying God. And so that question of, do I trust God's timing? And then when I have been wronged or something doesn't go my way, when I come out of it, do I focus on letting people know all that I've endured? Or do I just move right into, hey, God is still good. He can do it. Now let's just focus on him and move forward. And from then on, you see pretty amazing things happen in Joseph's life, from both his career as well as reconciliation with his family and a whole bunch of other things. So you want a really good read? Read the last 13, 14 chapters of Genesis in one sitting. It'll be an hour that you won't forget looking at the life of Joseph. But specifically, take a look at verse 1 and verse 16 of Genesis 41.